Now let's look at some issues with the weighted average cost of capital. To be precise, we are looking at the problems with using the weighted average cost of capital as the discount rate for any new investment project that a firm may be considering. So the weighted average cost of capital approach tells us that the return on an investment should be at least as high as the firm's overall weighted average cost of capital. So that's basically saying that we use the firm's weighted average cost of capital as the discount rate for any new project. Turns out we can do that. So we can use the firm's weighted average cost of capital as the discount rate for any new project. It's only appropriate for projects that have the same risk as the firm's current operations. Because if there is a project that's much riskier, less certain cash flows, which implies less certain dividends to the stockholders, then there should be compensation for the stockholders for facing a lot larger risk. High risk, high return, right? So the return that the investors will expect from a riskier project should be higher. That's from the CAPM formula, for example, where we have the beta, the risk measure. And so this means mathematically, in our net present value calculations for a project, the discount rate should be higher than the firm's WACC. The higher the discount rate, the lower the net present value of a project would be. And so it could be that the net present value is negative and the project should be rejected, following the NPV rule. But if we did not adjust the firm's WACC to this higher riskiness of the project, then we might be underestimating the true discount rate, which mathematically may end up giving us a positive net present value for a project that should have a negative net present value if we correctly used a slightly higher discount rate for it. So by mistakenly using firm's weighted average cost of capital rather than the project's weighted average cost of capital, the firm may be mistakenly accepting unprofitable high-risk projects. Also, we can say that the firm may be mistakenly rejecting profitable low-risk projects if it's using its own WACC rather than a slightly lower discount rate for a new project that is not as risky. Where such problem is particularly relevant is a corporation with more than one line of business or divisions. For example, let's say we have a company with two divisions and they have different levels of risk. Division A, maybe it's an electric company. It has a low risk, it's a stable business, and the appropriate weighted average cost of capital for this division is 13%. The company also has another division, Division B, doing something similar, electronics manufacturing. However, it's a different product and it's a lot higher risk. And the appropriate weighted average cost of capital for Division B is 17%. What is the company's overall weighted average cost of capital if we sort of aggregate divisions A and B? It's a mixture of these two different weighted average costs of capital, 13% and 17%. Let's say it's somewhere halfway, somewhere in the middle, like 15%. The problem is, if the two divisions are competing for resources, the firm may be incorrectly allocating more money to the riskier division, which is Division B. And if it uses the 15% discount rate to evaluate the projects that Division B would be considering, there rather than the correct 17% discount rate, then we might overestimate the net present value for the projects undertaken by Division B. The net present value may look like it's a positive value when in fact, if the 17% discount rate was used correctly, the NPV would have been a negative value. So the company may be incorrectly accepting projects which should be rejected, and as a result of that, it may end up losing money. In real life, firms are aware of this problem when they have multiple divisions, and they're realizing that the correct discount rate to use for a project undertaken by that specific division is to use that specific division's own weighted average cost of capital rather than the firm's overall weighted average cost of capital. So we need to use separate or divisional costs of capital as appropriate discount rates for projects undertaken by specific divisions. In other words, each division should use its own weighted average cost of capital. What may be other ways to figure out a proper discount rate to individual projects or divisions? There's something known in finance as the pure play approach. Pure play in Wall Street language means a company that focuses on just one line of business. So it has a very narrow business. It makes a very narrow product, something very unique, very specific. So our company that would like to undertake a new project that involves producing something specific may want to find one or more companies that specialize in the same kind of product. And we would then use the typical return on these investments from those other companies and sort of borrow it and use it as the discount rate for our product. The problem with the pure play approach may be, what if this new investment opportunity our firm is considering is something that does not have anything like it in other companies? So what if we may not be able to find suitable companies to sort of borrow their typical rate of return and use it for our project discount rate? Then there's another approach we could follow instead, the so-called subjective approach. So we are making subjective adjustments to our firm's overall weighted average cost of capital. Let's say our firm's overall weighted average cost of capital is 15%, but we are considering a project which is a lot riskier than anything we currently have. We may subjectively add, let's say, 6% to our weighted average cost of capital. So what's 15%? Our WACC plus 6% subjective adjustment. That's 21%. So essentially we are saying that, okay, how about we use a 21% discount rate for this high-risk project? If it's a new project with moderate risk, we may not want to make any adjustments. So we may take our firm's overall WACC 15% as is and use it as the discount rate for such projects. And the third possibility is that we are considering a new project which is a lot more predictable in terms of its cash flows. So a low-risk project, a lot less risky than everything else we currently have running. Then we may decide to use not a 15% discount rate, but something lower than that. And we subjectively decide to use a 4% lower discount rate. So 15% minus 4% gives 11%. I think the problems with the subjective approach are kind of obvious. How do we know how much to add or how much to subtract from the firm's overall WACC to make those adjusted discount rate calculations. Why plus 6%? Why not plus 5% or plus 7%? Why minus 4%? Why not subtracting something a little bit less or more than 4%? These adjustments are kind of almost random, or they're subjective, and that's where the name of this approach comes from. To summarize, using the firm's weighted average cost of capital as the discount rate for any new investment project may not always be correct. It's only correct if that new project displays similar riskiness as the firm's existing projects. Otherwise, we need to adjust our firm's WACC. There are three ways how we can find the correct weighted average cost of capital, or I should say the correct discount rate for a new project. We may use the divisional weighted average cost of capital. So each firm's division may have its own slightly different WACC. That's the proper discount rate for the division that would be in charge of the new investment project. 2, use pure play approach. So we kind of borrow the rate of return that other firms get on projects like the one we are considering and use it for our project's discount rate. 3, use subjective approach. So we take our firm's WACC and subjectively add a few percent or subtract a few percent. If the project we are considering is riskier than our existing projects, or the other way around, if they are not as risky as our firm's existing projects.